But I'm going to clap my hands and then we'll go. All right, welcome everybody. It's Wednesday Lunch and Learn. Today's topic, we're going to be talking about we're still on the Power BI adoption roadmap articles. So I'll just post the link on the chat if you want to follow on and look at all the boring stuff. You can do that. Otherwise, we'll be doing it the same as we did last week, where I'll pick out key pieces and take you through it. One thing I do have to open is OneNote so that I can do my whiteboarding. Before we get started, and because, you know, Power BI stuff, anybody that hasn't done the survey that we did from last week, which is this one, and I'll copy that and put it in the chat. I'll get you to do that. We are recording, Rob, but I'm recording on my machine, not on Teams. So just so you know, so we don't need to turn recording on. There's a form there. If you already did it last week, then don't respond again. But anyone that's new, if you can respond, that'd be great. We're going to have a quick look at the Power BI. Like I said, we're looking at executive sponsorship of data projects today. So I wanted to deep dive into that a little bit. But if you guys, we'll refresh this as we go. We'll capture any new responses. But I just wanted to quickly create a visual on this one after we wait for the refresh to finish. Don't think we got any new ones in that seconds there, did we? Oh, we've had 43 so far. Okay, so if I create a new page and put a logo on it. Now I wanted to have a look at where our response was, not our response, but our form. Okay, how many employees? We want that in the axis. And then we want the number of responses. No, we want the average R value in the values. And then we want to filter it by where the response name, I think it's name. No. Question. Was executive sponsorship. Okay. So, this is kind of interesting, right? Because, well, this is really interesting. If you've got 0 to 2 employees and you're doing a Power BI project and you don't have executive sponsorship, you've probably got an issue. But you might need to talk to yourself about your sponsorship of your own projects. So, in organizations of 11 to 25, we have to check the N value, don't we? Let me get the N value, sorry, number of responses. Let me put that in the tooltips. Number of responses in the tooltips. Bam. All right, we're doing Power BI, people. Look at this. Okay, so we had probably one response, is it? Oh, it's not in tooltips, did it? What have I done? Form. Number of responses, tooltips. There it is, 3 responses, and all of them were amazing. So this is the average value, right? So if you're in a medium, like a small organization, then you get good executive sponsorship. That probably makes sense. And then in the larger organizations, so the 10,000 plus and the 2,000 to 10,000, pretty good. So you've got reasonable executive sponsorship of your Power BI projects or whatever's happening. So that's kind of interesting, I think. I'll do a quick refresh to capture the people that just filled the form out. But yeah, that's cool. So obviously in small organizations, well, I don't know, I would probably expect that to be 6 because you don't have a lot of people. But yeah, like you can see the average is kind of, I think the response, the actual response, we've got it here, right? So 6 is amazing, and then there's good and meh and okay and really good and terrible. So mostly kind of good. It kind of looks like it averages out at kind of good, which I think is good. I think that's good. Okay. There we go. We did some Power BI in our Power BI meetup. We got to always do Power BI. I think that's going to be a rule. That puts some pressure on me to make sure that I always do Power BI, but that's fine. All right, we're going to zoom around and get this, and then I'm going to grab OneNote. And I'm going to create a new page, and I'm going to call it executive sponsorship plus mystery, probably center of excellence. Okay, so when we talk about executive sponsorship, so when you're planning to advance the data culture and the state of organizational adoption for Power BI, it's crucial to have executive sponsor or executive support. An executive sponsor is imperative because adopting Power BI is far more than just a technology project. I think that's a key kind of thing there, right? Adopting Power BI is far more than just a technology project. The mistake, and we kind of spoke about it last week, is this concept from maybe like a sort of a casual approach from IT where they say, okay, we'll just turn on the technology, we'll give you some licenses, and away you go. But as we all know, executive sponsorship of your Power BI thing it's kind of a, like I said last week, it's kind of a must-have. You really need to try and garner this as much as possible. Is anyone working in a Power BI project at the moment that doesn't have an executive sponsor? And you don't have to fully own up where you work or anything like that, but I'd be really interested to know how you're going with that. It says here in the article, some success can be achieved by a few determined individual contributors. The organization is in a significantly better position when a senior leader is engaged, supportive, informed, and available to assist. So you can actually make inroads, and like we see it all the time in Power BI projects that you can make inroads into Power BI. You know, one person can download Power BI and they can start building stuff. And we see a lot of that, like that kind of bottom-up approach where people out there in the business go out and they just download it because you can get it for free, but effectively there's a free license. And so if your company hasn't not turned it off, then it's on by default from a Office 365 point of view. It was an interesting sly move by Power BI that people can pay for their own licenses. Exactly. I thought that too, Michael. So they've got this pay your own license so IT doesn't have to model that you can do as well. And so that's that kind of shadow IT or, you know, skunkworks projects that appear inside these organizations. So it is possible to put Power BI in without executive sponsorship, but you really do need an executive sponsor. And so what does your executive sponsor help you with? Well, here's a list. So let's have a look at this list. So the first thing is obviously formulating a strategic vision, and priorities for not just Power BI as a tool, but like how do we handle data, how do we handle BI, and how do we handle analytics? You're often got a chief data officer in larger organizations these days. In a lot of ways, you'll have chief technology or chief information officers that are responsible for strategy in this space, and so you need them to be on board so that you know what the strategy is. Leading by example, actively using Power BI in a way that's consistent with the culture of the data culture and your adoption goals. This is super important. Like if you can get your executive leaders using Power BI up to the board, for example, when they're doing board presentations, Power BI is a great presentation tool when you know how to kind of use it as that kind of PowerPoint for data, using bookmarks, using it like with slides and things like that. You definitely can make a lot of inroads. And because, people in those executive meetings are like, what is this? How did you get it? How can we do this, right? And so we see a lot of inroads when executive stakeholders do actually use Power BI to present data to their peers. Allocating staff, obviously paying for stuff. So, who's the executive sponsor? They're the guy that pays or the girl that pays, right? So, keep that in mind. So they're going to be allocating resources associated to it and also prioritizing. And so what you get, and when you're dealing with a Power BI project, is often you have a prioritization piece that starts right at the beginning. And so this is a conversation we're often having because like we talk to a managing director or someone like that who says, okay, we want Power BI in our organization, and then you've got sort of all of his subordinates or her subordinates that are all jockeying for sort of position in that project where they say, well, finance, we need it really badly, or HR, we really need it really badly. And you need to prioritize, especially in the early days where you're trying to find those like high value, low complexity projects that kind of help you get Power BI into the organization and make it something that people want to use. You don't want to get bogged down in a really complex, horrible project. And so you need to kind of, you need someone at the top to be able to say, this project, we're going to do this project first because it's going to be easier, or it's going to be faster, or it's higher value for whatever reason. And so when that prioritization, eventually you have to just get to somebody that makes those decisions. Apparently it's quite hard to hire at the moment, hire CDOs, so Chief Data Officers at the moment, due to being a new position and not many experienced people. I agree. There's quite a few people in our community actually that are kind of, aspiring Chief Data Officers. And so it'd be interesting. I don't know if there's anyone on the call that's looking at the Chief Data Officer role, but I know, yeah, it's interesting that is a role that's out there, and a lot of the sort of the big sort of FANG companies have something like that, someone responsible for data. But yeah, people don't have a lot of experience doing it because it's fairly new. So I'd be interested to get people's thoughts on that. And then another thing from Michael, executives also love the default mobility that comes with Power BI. It's a great use case, people using reports on their phones. No hassle, I agree. The iPad is a fantastic, the Power BI app for iPad is fantastic for executives. And if you can get them using it and you can get reports that are optimized for it, you're going to have a good time because it's really fun to use. Okay, what else can our executive sponsor do? They can approve funding, of course. So then, these are the people who pay. Communicating announcements that are of critical importance. So that's broadcasting, we're putting Power BI in the organization, getting all those things out to their wider audience. They obviously have that it comes at that level. They've got that level of authority. Decision making, particularly strategic governance decisions, are going to be, we need someone to be able to escalate that kind of stuff. Dispute resolution, where you've got issues that can't be resolved operationally or tactically. And then supporting the organizational changes, for example, creating or expanding the center of excellence, which we'll talk about next. Yeah, and so this is going to be the bits of the puzzle that your executive sponsor is going to help you with in your larger Power BI projects. The ideal executive sponsor has sufficient credibility, influence, and authority throughout the organization. So that's something to keep in mind. It's no good getting the head of the BI team to be your executive sponsor if they don't have the credibility and the influence at the level that it needs to be for that project. It's just the unfortunate reality of it. You need someone right at the top, preferably at the very top if you can, but you never. But obviously every organization's different. So identifying your executive sponsor. So there's a couple of different ways to identify your executive sponsor. So there's two kind of ways that they talk about here. One is the top-down pattern. So your executive sponsor is selected by a more senior executive. So the chief CEO might hire a CDO. So chief executive officer might hire a chief data officer, as we sort of spoke about, or a chief analytics officer, a CAO. That's another name that sometimes you see. I've never seen one in Australia. I think that's a more American style thing. Does anyone know of a CAO here in Australia? I'm not sure that I've ever seen one. They're obviously your ideal candidates for sure. If they've got a CDO, they're the people that you want to be looking to find. You might also have someone like the CFO, right? So your financial person is often the executive. Well, they're often the executive sponsor of a lot of technology projects because sometimes technology reports through to the CFO. Unfortunately, that's sometimes because technology is seen as a cost center and not as a value adding service, and so you might find that it's a little bit harder in organizations that are structured that way, because that kind of implies that that's seen as a bit of a cost. But CFOs for data and analytics, they usually, it says here, they've got a good track record of leading data and analytics in their organization. Why? Because they use Excel and they love Excel and they do it all the time. So simple as that, really. CFOs, we've got a few CFOs that we're mentoring at the moment. We've just got a glut of CFOs at the moment that are asking to learn Power BI and bring some of their Excel stuff into Power BI. So I think it's starting to really hit. We're seeing that kind of next wave of, I don't know if you call them fast followers these days. It's probably the majority now, or even maybe getting into the late majority of Power BI adoption. I'm not sure where it is from how many Fortune 500s use it, but it's a lot. So I think we're in the majority for sure. So you find, yeah, if the CFO or maybe like if you had someone like the CMO, like a marketing officer or someone like that leading it as your executive sponsor, it's likely you're going to be doing your Power BI project in their team first, right? And then they want to replicate that across the rest of the organization. If it's at C level, then you're in a great space, right? It indicates that organization resources are important. The organization recognizes the importance of data as a strategic asset and is actively advancing its data culture. Yeah. So, good sign if you've got a C level, or one of those sort of higher level. Your bottom up pattern. So the other way to identify your executive sponsor is through a bottom-up pattern. So your candidate for executive sponsor role could emerge due to the success they've experienced with BI. For example, business unit within the organization, such as finance, has organically achieved great success with respect to the use of data and analytics. So they form their own data culture in a small scale, and then you want to build that out. So your finance director or then might grow into executive sponsorship role by sharing that success with the other business units. So this is where, if you're in this position where you are the executive sponsor at the moment and you don't necessarily have that influence that you kind of need at that sort of C level, then you might look to you've got a marketing job ahead of you, essentially, where you need to be able to show those successes. Hey, here we are in the finance team, and we've had these successes. Look at this cool stuff. And then, getting other leaders on board that way. So you can potentially do it that way. Bottom-up approach is more likely to occur in smaller organizations because the ROI and strategic imperative data culture or digital transformation is not necessarily urgent for the C levels. They've got bigger fish to fry or whatever at the time. With the bottom-up approach, your sponsor may be able to make some project progress, but they won't have formal authority over other business units. That's your challenge, right? Is that you don't have formal authority over the other business units. So that means like I said, it's a marketing job. Without the clear authority, it's only a matter of time until someone challenges the project beyond the level of the authority of the person who's doing the executive sponsorship. So for this reason, top-down approach has a higher probability of success, as we've already discussed. But those initial successes with bottom-up approach can convince the top guys that your project is worth doing. So we certainly do that a lot with our customers. We're often approached by sort of a mid-level manager who has a particular Power BI problem. We look for that kind of quick win that we can kind of get there, and then use that to get in front of the CEO or whoever to say, hey, this is what we've done. And then you find that kind of ball starts rolling. So for those of you that are developers or consultants, it's definitely a good way to kind of approach that. Okay. Considerations and key actions for executive sponsors. What can we do to make sure we've got good executive sponsorships? Ensure you have clarity over who that person is. Notice they only speak about them in the singular. Yeah, there's only ever one executive sponsor. I wonder if that's always true. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that? Could you ever have multiple executive sponsors? I don't think so. I think you always needs to be one to resolve priority issues. Identify someone in a sufficient position of influence and authority across organizational boundaries who understands the value and the impact of business intelligence. So if they don't understand the value of it, one of the things in the old adoption roadmap in Power BI was education of your executive sponsor, right? It's about educating them so that they know the value of the tool and how it works and that kind of stuff. And that can be, if you get them on board, then it's a big deal. It's important that the person has a vested interest in the success of analytics in your organization. I think that's an important point. Yeah. If they don't care whether it succeeds or fails, they're probably not a great executive sponsor. It should be tied to some kind of strategic goal they're trying to achieve. Involve your executive sponsor in all strategic level governance decisions involving business intelligence and data management. So get them involved in all those decisions, of course. Involve your executive sponsor in all data culture initiatives to ensure alignment and consensus of goals and priorities. Just pop that up there. I'm just going to do a quick one of those and then come back to the chat. From an efficiency point of view and sign off, one makes sense. Yeah, I agree, Michael, I agree. One executive sponsor. Formalize the arrangement with documented responsibilities for the executive sponsor role. So I don't know about necessarily, sort of depends on the culture of your organization and how much you document stuff, I guess, but formalizing what their roles and responsibilities are is really a good idea. It means they know what what is expected of them as the executive sponsor of the project, and what's not expected of them, like what stuff that they don't need to worry about. So you can do like a RACI chart or something like that if you want to formalize that. And so that should be as part of introducing the whole concept to the executive sponsors if you're having those initial meetings. Consider naming a backup. Is an interesting idea. Backup can attend meetings in oops, that's the wrong paste. Sorry. They can attend meetings when the other one's absent, effectively, because funny things about executives is they're pretty hard to get a hold of sometimes, and sometimes you need them. So consider, especially if you're in a larger organization, you might need a backup when that other person's not available for whatever reason to make decisions. And like delegation of authority and all that kind of stuff is often a key thing there. Identify influential advocates within the leadership team for each business unit. In addition to your executive sponsor, it's easier to accomplish your objectives if you have the cooperation and involvement of business unit leaders. I would definitely agree with this. So having not just the executive sponsors, but also advocates for your reporting project within the leadership team is, and that's where I was sort of saying those sort of that next level down, and they're sort of jockeying for position in the project. You're going to find some are right on board, some are not so sure, some are completely against it, and identifying all of those different stakeholders, and like there's a few different techniques you can do for kind of stakeholder identification and management and influence, and thinking about where they fit in that sort of space can be really, really useful, especially as an external person. If you're a consultant or you're an external Power BI person, or even if you're just a BI development team and you're getting to know a new business unit leader or something like that, doing those stakeholder matrices or those stakeholder, they do rings of influence and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if there's any super stakeholder experts in here, but there's lots of different techniques you can use for stakeholder stuff. And then final thing on our executive sponsorship is our maturity level. So this is how you know where you're up to with your executive sponsors. So level 100, so that's the lowest level of maturity in terms of our executive sponsor, is that there's awareness from at least one person about the strategic importance of Power BI. They're not a Power BI sponsor, or there's no executive level decision maker. So there's kind of an awareness, but nothing else really. There's no formal identified person, anything like that. So if you're in that space, then you're at kind of the lowest level of maturity. I guess there is the level 0, which is nobody knows anything about Power BI, but they didn't add that in here. Level 200 is there's executive support exists for Power BI through informal channels. So there's an informal relationship. So your mid-level 300 is there's a formal relationship at C-level for Power BI. And it's interesting to have this concept of an executive owning, we call it for Power BI, but it's not really. It's for data and analytics generally, right? It's not just for the tool. You wouldn't set an executive sponsor to own a tool necessarily. You would have them own the function or the value stream, ideally. So what's the value you get out of data and analytics, and they kind of own that piece. And that way, that's tool agnostic, and you can use different tools to achieve the same things. Level 400, senior level support is in place to grow and sustain investment in Power BI by someone with sufficient authority to access or with sufficient authority across organizational boundaries. So that's where you've got quite good. You're in a quite good position there if you've got that kind of thing going on in your organization. And then finally, executive support's a driver for advancing data culture. So they're not just like doing it, they're actually actively driving data culture within the organization. They're involved, they're full on engaged and happening from a data culture and implementation point of view. So those are your different maturity levels. Now, in the next steps in the articles, they talk about the next steps talking about content ownership and content delivery, which I think, so I wanted to skip those. I'm going to move to Center of Excellence, because if we look at our adoption overview again, just quickly. Then we've kind of got, actually I was looking for the data culture one, sorry. Wrong image, this one. Copy. Okay, so you see we've got here at the top, you've got executive sponsorship and center of excellence kind of at the top of that data culture bubble that we kind of spoke about. And so these are the two kind of areas that are going to provide oversight to kind of the culture of data in our organization, the culture of analytics in our organization. And so I wanted to kind of skip to that because I think that they're kind of, related, tangentially related. And then we can talk a little bit more about the actual sort of practice of content ownership and content delivery a little bit after that, which I think are also related, but they're kind of related in a slightly different way. Did anyone have any comments about executive sponsorship? Was there anything else you think that's missing out of there that we think might be useful for people to know at this stage? I've got a comment from Bianca. When looking for a sponsor, I've often started with the C-level that knows the value of Power BI and Insights, get them to sell to relevant C-level sponsors to get the project off the ground. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of what they're talking about there. Is like, look for that C-level that's interested. And then that's what they do all day, is that they sell internally what they're doing to the other executive team. So you'll find that they're pretty naturally good at it.
I guess the only thing I would add is that we as practitioners need to be aware that we need to give them the material that they need to be able to sell it internally. You need to be able to, they don't have time to do the research themselves. So Correct. The easier you can make it for them in the reasons, the more likely your project is to go ahead.
I 100% agree with that. Yep. You need to really lay it out for them. And so that's that education piece that I alluded to earlier. That's educating that executive sponsor is really giving them all of the tools that they need to be able to get this in their organization. And it'll be different for different organizations. Some will be really rigorous and they want all sorts of information before they'll commit to any kind of project. And some will be basically just trust, the word of the person who says it and go ahead, And so you have different organizations with different practices, and you need to kind of account for that. Do I have any executive sponsor stories that I can regale you with? Well, before we move on to the next topic. When have I messed up with executive sponsors? I like a mess up story rather than a success story. I think that you learn more. Not sure we've. There must be one. So the thing that can happen with executive sponsors is they can come in, they'll scuttle your project. Like if you don't have an executive sponsor and you start something and then the executive gets wind of it and it's in their realm, they can very quickly scuttle your project. So we've had a couple of times where executives are so we were doing some reporting for a sales for the sales organization. So we were engaged by the head of sales. They were like and the pretty powerful person in the organization. This is a very sales driven organization. They're basically the two IC next to the CEO. And wanted to build sales dashboards, and we built all this whole sales platform out for them in terms of using Power BI and all the rest of it. And the project was a difficult project. There was a lot of data engineering issues, and we can talk about the 100 million ways you can mess up a Power BI project another day. But we do a whole session on that at Lunch and Learn. But one of the things was it kind of part of the sales reporting, there was some operational stuff, right? So they wanted to, this is like a transport company. So they did like DIFOT, which is, delivered in full on time, which is a big KPI metric in kind of your transport and delivery industries, right? And so they're worried about delivered in full, and they wanted to compare that to sales data. So they were asking to get delivered in full on time metrics. Now that crossed over to the COO, right? The COO was in charge of DIFOT. He didn't care about what you said for sales, but he did care about how DIFOT was represented to the organization. And just that was almost enough to scuttle, like, and we were kind of a year into this project of building out this sales platform, and he almost knocked the whole thing on the head just because there was one metric basically in this sales platform that he needed to confirm, or he wanted to be involved with, right? And then he was getting involved with the rest of the project because suddenly it touched his turf. And so that's the type of thing you have to be careful of with executive sponsorships. And like I said, these guys jockey, or girls and people jockey for the position, at the top of the chain. And so when it comes to analytics, because our job is insight, we're insight delivery, as anyone that's seen my my presentations in the past knows that, that's the business we're in. And so part of that is the narrative of what people are trying to say, to support their own position, right? So Executive A is saying, hey, all of our sales are going great and look how good I am at my position. And Executive B is like, well, our operations are going great, and the reason why any kind of failure is because sales is selling things that we shouldn't be delivering, right? And then sales is saying, well, the reason why we aren't making money is because operations aren't delivering properly, right? And so they're having this conversation, and they want data to support that. And us as the analysts or the Power BI people or the responsible for the data are kind of caught between these two narratives. And I mean, part of the beauty of Power BI is that they can kind of go off, hopefully, and build their own narrative and not have to worry about you. But that's often not the reality of it, right? They're coming back to you to get that narrative to be able to go forward to the board, whoever, to make that happen. So something to be aware of.
I'll add another war story as well, Greg. And so we had a big risk is if your executive sponsor leaves the business.
Yeah.
So we've built out full data platforms under executive sponsorship, and then they've left and they bring their pet consultancy in to come and redo the entire thing. So that is a risk too.
100%, 100%. We've got a few like that where we were lucky to survive because we're just good enough that Power BI is good enough, and we'd done a good enough job that the incoming executive decided to keep the project going because it was kind of in flight and had a lot of value associated with it. So that's a good thing. But yeah, you'll find, and that like you get a new CIO in, for example, and they bring their own cronies in, that's what all CIOs do. The first thing they do is they look around to where they can put their mates in that they know are going to deliver for them. If that happens to be in BI and that person happens to have used, insert the name of your favorite BI tool here that isn't Power BI, guess what the first project's going to be? It's going to be, let's move it all over to Tableau or whatever, because we know that they know, and like I've seen some crazy decisions where you've got a full Microsoft 365 environment. It's all Microsoft tech up and down the stack. And then someone who comes in who just happens to know, I don't know, Oracle or something, and they're just like, yep, we're putting Oracle in because that's what I know. And you're just like, it's just like, I don't understand that decision, but okay, enjoy that little project. And invariably 2 or 3 years later, they're ringing you back up and saying, hey, remember Power BI? We think we probably should do that again. So yeah, very interesting. Kelly, make sure that your executive sponsor has realistic expectations of project development timeframes. Yeah, absolutely. It's the realistic expectation. Setting expectations with executives is obviously extremely important. Extremely important. Cool. All right. Well, that's it for executive sponsors. How are we going for time? We're going good. So let's talk then a little bit about Center of Excellence. This has got a little bit more content in it, so I'll whip through it a bit more quickly. So what is a Center of Excellence? That's probably the first question. Let me type the word Center of Excellence first, and I'm going to type it the Australian way. Excellent. I can't spell. Center the Excellence? Center of Excellence. What is a Center of Excellence? So a Center of Excellence is an internal team of technical and business experts. Note the word technical and business. Yeah, technical and business. Not technical experts, not business experts. Technical and business. Just really want to point that one out. The team actively assists with others with the organization who are working with data. So COE, Center of Excellence, forms the nucleus of the broader community. So this is slightly different, and you'll see they've got them both, to the community of practice. So this is the oversight, really. Okay, so it's an oversight team. It's not so much not so much the people who are doing the Power BI. These are the people who have the expertise associated with how it should be done. A COE, might be known as a Business Intelligence Competency Center. Well, can't say I've ever heard it called that. The Business Intelligence Competency Center, spelt wrong, or Capability Center, or a Center of Expertise. Some organizations use the term a squad. I like the term squad. Let's call it that. The Power BI squad. So there you go. Many organizations form the COE responsibilities within their BI team or the analytics team. That's kind of the natural place. You've probably got the technical expertise within your BI team right now. You might not have the business expertise, though, within your BI team. So consider that. Your center of excellence is not just your BI team. It's more than that. Having a Center of Excellence team formally recognized in your organizational chart is recommended but not required. What's most important is that the roles and responsibilities are identified, prioritized, and assigned. It's common for centralized BI or analytics teams to take on many of the COE responsibilities. Some responsibilities may also reside within IT, like security. For simplicity, in this series of articles, COE means a specific group of people, though you might implement it differently, right? So it's very common to implement a COE with a scope broader than Power BI alone. For example, the Power Platform COE or Analytics COE. Yeah, and I think you probably want to be looking at Data and Analytics Center of Excellence is probably the scope that I like the most because then you can include things like governance and all the rest of it. I wouldn't be having a Power BI Center of Excellence as such. You've got data, security, governance, all that stuff probably needs to sit inside that. What does the COE do? Here's a list. That's supposed to be goals. Oh, look at that horrible G. I'll just delete it and then no one will notice. Okay, goals for a COE. So your Center of Excellence people, this kind of, they're going to evangelize your data-driven culture. So that they should be talking about it in terms of they should be advocating for data-driven culture at all times. Promoting the adoption of Power BI or whatever tool. Nurturing, mentoring, guiding, and educating internal users to increase their skills and level of self-reliance. So that's nurturing, mentoring, guiding, educating. So if you guys are consultants, then this is a great way for you to get involved with your customers' businesses by providing this mentoring, guiding, education, internal users. We were talking about mentoring earlier because we're getting a lot of requests for mentoring at the moment. And it's one of the most effective ways to get someone up to speed with Power BI is to have someone shoulder surf with them. So the way we do mentoring at Dear Watson is we do like 2-hour team session. Someone sits with them and you just build stuff together. You just pair program, right? So that person who's running, who's being mentored does all the driving. So the consultant doesn't do anything. And then you just tell them what to do, or you give them advice or say, hey, try this, try that, blah, blah, blah. And you find that over time, people become really, they find that really valuable. So I really recommend mentoring. And so if you've got that, so if you're just an internal BI team, then you can provide that mentoring or you can engage consultants to do the mentoring as well. Coordinating efforts, disseminating knowledge across organizational boundaries, creating consistency and transparency for the user community. So that's your community of practice. Reducing friction and points, finding relevant data and analytics content. I think that's kind of really important, is that sometimes you get a little bit of like, how should we do this? Should we format our slices this way or that way? What do we do with date slices? Should we use buttons? Should we do it by month, day, year, week, time? Like how do you do this stuff in our organization? So that's the goal of the COEs, to define all that stuff for people. This is how we do it. We use these logos. We use this style guide. We do this stuff. This is where we store stuff. This is how we develop stuff. All of that stuff can be defined by the Center of Excellence. Maximizing the benefits of your self-service BI while reducing the risks. Reducing technical debt. Oh, my favorite thing, technical debt. By helping make good decisions that increase consistency and something fewer inefficiencies. Result in fewer inefficiencies. Technical debt is the build-up of stuff that happens in any technology when you just kind of implement it, right? So if you just turn on a technology, then what you do is you incur this kind of technical debt. And technical debt is like overhead for the IT team is a good example, right? So if I turn on the Power BI service, you don't just get Power BI and then it magically works forever. You immediately incur the overhead, the debt of having to maintain that Power BI service. How do you get users onto that Power BI service? How do you maintain security for the Power BI service? What do you do when something goes wrong? How do you provide support for that service? So this is the debt that sort of accumulates. And so every piece of technology you implement, like it's particularly big in reducing technical debt, is pretty mature these days in sort of modern development practices, because the more it builds up, you can get in this situation in sort of general IT, like technology teams, where all they do all day is firefight and they never actually do anything useful. And I've seen it 100 million times. It's just, you just spend, like, you have a huge support team and that literally all they're doing every day is resetting users' passwords or doing stuff that is just just paying down this accumulation of debt. And what they never actually do is put in something in place where people can reset their own password and remove that debt. So that's the idea of technical debt and removing it. It's really, really important idea in technology. One of the most powerful aspects of a COE is the cross-departmental insight into how Power BI is used by the organization. I think that's really important. Cross-departmental is the key word here. Yeah? Because you need representatives from everywhere to be able to do it. It's not just an IT thing. It's not just the BI team. It's about how the business need to use Power BI as well, and who those teams are in the business, and then providing insight into how that gets used across everywhere. So something really important there. What is the scope of the COE responsibilities? So obviously this varies significantly, but let's have a look at the scope of their responsibilities. Oof, that's a lot of words. I'm going to just zoom this out a little bit so my head isn't over everything. Mentoring the internal Power BI community. Already spoke about mentoring. Really, really useful. Producing, curating, and promoting training material. Yeah, so training material. Another opportunity for your consultants out there. Yeah, producing, curating, and promoting the training materials is really good. Creating documentation and resources consistent use of standards and best practices. So this is how do we do it in our organization? Create documentation. There's some articles on this stuff as well. Mentoring and user enablement. I think we'll get to that at one day. Yeah, we will. Applying, communicating, and assisting with governance. Governance, the whole topic in and of itself, obviously. Handling and assisting with system oversight and administration. So that's like understanding what's happening in the Power BI world, staying in touch with Power BI Melbourne user group, coming along to the user groups, saying, hey, look at this cool feature. Oh, I just went into a talk by Marco Russo or someone like that, and there's this thing you can do in DAX now that's going to save our business, all this cool stuff. That's the kind of stuff that you really want to be providing that. They're potentially going to be third level support type for users issues escalated from the help desk. So help desk triaging user issues, and then who do we escalate a Power BI thing to? Well, it's going to be someone in your center of excellence to be able to help with that. Helping with developing proofs of concepts, especially, and testing out new things. Hey, we want to do real-time data in Power BI. How's that going to work? No idea. Well, let's put some of these people, the experts, on that experiment. Yeah. That's going to be what your center of excellence is going to be doing. And establishing and maintaining a BI platform and data architecture. So getting it up and running and maintaining the architecture.
That last bit is kind of interesting, because I find in a lot of organizations the infrastructure team is quite separate from the analytics team, and Power BI kind of blends the two together. It's an interesting delineation problem.
Yeah, I agree. It's it can be a tough one for particularly for organizations that have different structures, particularly highly siloed structures and technology structures, you can struggle with this kind of stuff, because this is about, cross-functional collaboration, and you know that can create all sorts of dramas. Really important for UI, UX, and adoption to have common formats. Makes it so much easier for users. Absolutely. Create those common formats and then use them across all your different bits and pieces. Okay, who are good candidates for a Center of Excellence in your organization? Let's have a look. Someone who understands the vision for the organization is definitely important, right? So this is what we're trying to achieve. We spoke a little bit, and we didn't really talk about the vision, the data culture vision in executive sponsor, but I would say the executive sponsor is kind of responsible for that data culture vision. And I think they did say that when we spoke about it last week. They were like, yeah, your executive sponsor is your data culture vision person. So you should be in line with that. Someone who's not on board with how, Power BI is no good, let's use Tableau, whatever it is. They're not necessarily a great candidate then for your Center of Excellence, right? Makes sense. Have a desire to continually improve analytics best practices for the organization. Continual improvement, absolutely. Continuous learning, really important. And psychological safety, right? Making it safe for people to be able to participate in these things, super, super important. So creating a culture where people can actually pipe up and say stuff without fear of, being made to look an idiot because they're from the business. And if you have got those really argumentative IT types that are coming in and sort of talking over everybody, and this is how it has to be because IT blah blah blah, and no other ideas are any good, then they're not necessarily going to be a great candidate for your Center of Excellence. You need someone who's going to be collaborative. Obviously someone with interest and expertise in Power BI. So yep, get me in. Interested in seeing Power BI used effectively and adopted successfully throughout the organization. Makes sense. Someone who's willing to take the initiative to continually learn, adapt, and grow. I think kind of covered that. Readily shares knowledge as well. So it's not just about hoarding the knowledge. We see that in technology a lot, where there's people who like get knowledge and then they don't like sharing knowledge. They love like everybody has to rely on me for the stuff. It's not good in this situation. You need to be able to share your knowledge. Interested in repeatable processes, standardization, governance with a focus on user enablement. Oh my goodness, I love this. Hyper-focused on collaboration. There it is. Hyper-focused on collaboration with others, comfortable working in an agile fashion, because Power BI is just best done in an agile way. Don't set up a waterfall project for your Power BI. You just end up in a world of hurt, in my opinion. That's all BI. That's not just Power BI. Just any BI projects, waterfall. They get real nasty real quick. Have an inherent interest in being involved and helping others. Of course, can effectively translate business needs into solutions. Communicate well with both technical and business colleagues. So everyone in this little community here are a good example for people in the Center of Excellence. Oh, we got questions. Marlon, any thoughts on establishing the COE across multiple countries? That's a really, really good question. I spoke to a very large Australian telecommunications organisation about this very subject at one point, and it's super, super tough, because you've got potentially you've got BI professionals in other countries. And shout out to everybody in the Ukraine at the moment, because I know a lot of technology people are from the Ukraine, and so I hope it's horrible what's happening over there, and I hope they can find a way to be safe. But obviously other countries as well. And then, the key to a good Center of Excellence is that ability to all get together and collaborate. Now, I think like this community that we're doing here right now is that it's much easier now that we've got everybody's enabled to work remotely sort of across the world, which I think is great. So COVID, for all of its bad things, actually created a revolution in technology from that perspective. So I think that's really important, but it doesn't, probably location matters less than their role and their position and their influence within the organization and how invested they are in following this kind of rule. The communication piece is obvious. I think probably the hardest bit. If you've got the right people on the bus, then you should be able to get them going. But one of the cultural differences make a huge difference for this kind of stuff. You have different people from different cultures, and they They do this kind of stuff. They collaborate in different ways, and that can make things really, really difficult as well. So yeah, I don't have a good answer. Sorry, Marlon, but yeah, other than it's quite difficult, but hopefully getting better. So can we say the executive sponsor and center of excellence candidates overlap? Yeah, there'd certainly be. The executive sponsor, I would think, is on the center of excellence for sure, right? They want to be probably chairing that. Does maintaining a BI platform and data architecture include the data documentation, dictionaries, and glossaries? In most cases, I would say so, but not every organization. It's unclear the overlap between source system owners, administrators, and the BI teams. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So you've got people who own source systems and then BI people. I think there's a lot of overlap in organizations for that. But I think of them as quite different. They're quite different roles, aren't they? Because source system people, they're like in the IT team, they're interested in maintaining the source system, stopping it from going slow, keeping the lights on, optimizing the database, making it work, making sure users have access, fixing all the bugs, all those kind of things. That's typically what your application administration person is responsible for. Whereas a BI person is responsible for, yes, they have they touch that source system because they need to get data out of it, but after that, it's all about query performance, how to make the analytics good, how do we create facts and dimension tables out of this transactional data, all that kind of stuff. So I think they're quite different.
So an example there is as the reporting analyst, was spent 3 hours looking into why data I was pulling in a report wasn't matching what a user could see in the front end of the system. And after throwing it back to the system admin going, I can't figure this out, is this a bug? They came back and said, oh no, we just stopped maintaining that field.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, there's the kind of no man's land between, well, yeah.
Yeah.
Need to know, and considering inside outside the team, which frustrating.
That is a super interesting one, and that kind of leads me into a discussion around content ownership, because I have this thing. I go on this these rants with customers about having data product owners, and that's a really good example of where a data product owner is needed, right? Because that field, even though it doesn't mean anything to the administrator, like because it doesn't have any transactional value or whatever from their perspective, it might have a BI value, it might have a organizational value, right? So the analyst knows that has an organizational value, and so they're trying to get it happening. But those guys are kind of at the same level. And so there's no executive kind of product owner for the data associated with it. Let's say that's a customer field, like the customer address, right? And it's maintained in this system, but it's also maintained in 14 other systems in different ways. It's in the CRM, it's in the sales system, it's in something else. And so which one is the source of truth and the one that's important for BI and all that kind of stuff? And who owns that? Who was the owner of the customer address field, right? That's a massive gap that I see in pretty much every organization we go into. There's that no one, this concept of data product owner, which is a big concept in data engineering, data ops and data engineering, where they're saying, well, someone's got to be responsible for owning this data content. And you say it to customers and they're like, what are you on about? No one owns the customer address. And I'm like, well, should they? And they're like, yeah, but no one does, like it's really, really important.
Yeah, one kind of where I'm coming from is that, from my experience in a lot of organizations, you'll go in and they'll have an application and they'll want to do analytics on it. And as part of that analytics project, you have to uncover, what is happening in the application, what the fields are, because they may have just installed a third-party application, they've just been using it. They don't actually know what the structure is. So part of that project is to document the API and each of the fields and what they're doing. And then you've got the next step, which is kind of your metrics catalog, explaining and documenting how each of your metrics are organized within the organization as well.
Yeah. It's it's for sure. It's a really interesting space. Now, we are going to, I'm looking at the content for the Center of Excellence. There is, there's quite a lot of it. So I'm going to skip because we're running a little bit running out of time. So what did we just do? We did the staffing. Okay, so different roles and responsibilities. So in the article, I'm not going to go into all the different roles because there's quite a lot of them, but there's different roles in the COE. So there's a list. Here's the link to the list if you need it. It's common for multiple people to overlap roles, and when you see all the roles, there's quite a few. There's coach, trainer, COE leader, analyst, modeler, report creator, user support. So there's quite a few different areas. When you're structuring a COE, the structure can vary amongst organizations, obviously. The four most common ways you can structure a COE are centralized, unified, federated, or decentralized. Look at that. We've got 4 different ways of structuring our COE. Unified, federated, or decentralized. There's all sorts of other variations as well, apparently. So this is interesting. So what's centralized? Centralized is your single shared services team. So you've got a centralized COE, which means that everybody's in the same team, I guess. Good things about this, there's a single point of accountability for the single team, and they are responsible for managing. There's one group, it's easy to start, you can go straight away. A centralized team might have an authoritarian tendency to favor a one-size-fits-all decision that doesn't always work well for all business units. That's really interesting. So they know their way because they're all used to doing it a particular way, but it doesn't necessarily work for all the business units. There's a tendency to prefer IT over business skills. Notice I was pretty thinking about the business thing. That's why, is because these centralized teams tend to be IT people and they think about IT stuff in IT ways. Trust me, I know because I was an IT guy and still am. Due to the centralized nature, it may be more difficult for the COE members to sufficiently understand all of the business units, the needs of the business units, right? So if you centralize, you lose maybe some of the vision of that. Unified is same as centralized, but it's expanded to include other business areas and business units. So again, the pros are like the single point of accountability. There's one group from an organizational chart point of view. They understand the needs of the business more deeply because of those extra members who bring in domain expertise. The cons are embedded COE members, so those extra members who are dedicated to a specific business unit have different organizational chart responsibilities than the people they serve directly within the business unit. So you might get organizational complications because people report in weird ways, and so there's no accountability, and then you end up with a kind of a weird situation there. So be aware of that if you're going to go for a unified approach. Federated. I can't believe they got so many different types of COE, to be honest. This is awesome. Federated is a shared services team plus satellite members from each functional area or business unit. Okay, so you've got the central team, and then there's one person who is a virtual member of the team in each business unit. I quite like this approach. They work in coordination, even though its members reside in different business units. Satellite members are focused on development activities. Okay, so the pros of this are there's cross-functional involvement from the people who represent the business, so you get good business balance. There's a good balance of centralized and decentralized representation. Distributed data ownership situations exist. Data ownership, that's what we were talking about earlier. Do you have data product owners? When you have distributed data owners, that could be good for this. That's a pro, right? So case could be when the business units take direct responsibility for data management activities. This is a good model. That's why I like it, I guess, because it's a good model for where you've got data ownership, distributed data ownership, which is what I would recommend. Since core and satellite members span organizational boundaries, federated requires strong leadership, excellent communication. You're going to have communication issues because there's so many people. Communication overhead is definitely something you need to think about. There's a higher risk of encountering competing priorities because Joe blogs and Jane blogs, they want to do different things, and they both have the same amount of power within the organization and all that kind of stuff. The approach typically involves part-time people or dotted line organizational chart accountability that can introduce competing time pressures. Yes. And then decentralized. The final one, completely decentralized. Independently managed by business units. So that means everybody's got their own COE. Interesting. The pros are it's focused on a business unit, making it easier to quickly adapt. So if it's specialized data culture exists, then people get it quicker because you're learning about your own business unit. Policies and practices are tailored, which is nice. A lot of agility, a lot of flexibility. Priorities are focused on their own business unit, so they're not competing. Okay, what's the risks? And I'm sure you can probably guess a lot of them. Decentralizing means you operate in isolation. So you're off and you end up doing things by yourself. So you might not do best practice. You might just do okay practice, and then other people do best practice. So you won't have consistency or standardization across the whole organization necessarily. Collaboration with the centralized team may be informal or inconsistent. Yes, not much collaboration. Inconsistent policies, which it's really all the same stuff. Difficult to scale. Would it be difficult to scale? Wouldn't you just have a little model that you can shoot out to people? Maybe. Potential rework to bring one or more decentralized COEs in alignment with organizational-wide policies. That's an interesting one, especially if you've got centralized, like you've got so we'll talk about it in content ownership, but you've got these blended approaches, right? You've got all IT do and own everything, or BI do and own everything, and then you've got the business does everything that they want to do. That's just got to up and bottom up and top down, or corporate BI versus self-service BI, right? And so if you've got a self-servicey decentralized approach, you've got all these people making all this content, and then you're trying to do a board report and they all look different. So you need to potentially rework these reports to make them fit a consistent model when you try to bring them together, when you're needing to do organizational-wide reporting. So that's really interesting. Large business units with significant funding may have more resources, and so there's potential imbalance of associated with cost and funding. Here's an important note, apparently, from Power BI, from the Power BI doco people. Highly centralized COE tends to be more authoritarian, while highly decentralized COEs tend to be more siloed. Each organization, you need to weigh the pros and cons to apply them in the best way for your organization. Yes, the most effective approach tends to be unified or federated, which bridges organizational boundaries. I agree. I think federated. I would go federated. If you want my recommendation, look for federated. There's some stuff here about funding. I'm going to skip it. We don't need to worry about funding. Talk to the CFO. I don't know what it says. Yeah, there's different funding models, but I don't think we need to worry about it for today. We'll skip to the next bit. Okay, key actions. This is what we want, just to round this off. What do you need to consider, or what are the actions you need to take to set up your center of excellence? This is too much text. I'm going to do it one at a time so you don't have to read it all at once. Put it right here. Okay, define the scope of responsibilities for the COE. Very important. So write down who does what. Skills and competencies. So you need to know who's doing what and what the skills you need for that COE. Analyze whether the COE has the required systems and infrastructure in place to meet its goals. Do we have all the things we need? Do we need Power BI gateways? Do we need infrastructure associated with that? Do we need a data warehouse? Do we need a data lake? Do we need a lake house? Do we need some other storage? Do we need SQL servers? All these things need to be thought about. You can't recommend that everybody do lake housing or Synapse or something if you don't have Synapse or a lake. Determine what COE structure is most appropriate for your organization, as we just spoke about. Verify that staffing, roles, responsibilities, and appropriate organizational chart relationships are in place. Makes sense. Identify the internal customers and any external customers to be served by the COE. Identify how the COE will generally engage with those customers. So who is going to use the COE? What is it there for? Don't just create a team for a team's sake. They have to have a reason for existing. If you're starting out with centralized or decentralized, consider about scale. Scaling is going to be your issue, which makes sense. Make sure you have a funding plan, which we didn't go, but decide whether it's purely a cost center with an operating budget or whether it operates as a profit center. So you do chargeback. I love chargeback in IT. It's very, very always causes a lot of controversy. All right. and a comms strategy for your COE, right? So think about, okay, you've got all these people and stuff, you've created this cool team. How do we get it out there to your business users about how to use it? I'll leave the last little bit, which is the maturity levels. I'm going to leave that for today because I think we're out of time. But that is executive stakeholders and the center of excellence. I just want to say thanks to everybody. There's a few people that have got to go. Thanks to those people that are going. Rolling out Power BI will expose a lot of shortcomings in the organization, like MDM, governance, security standards. I 100% agree, Steve. That's very true. Michael agreed as well before he left. Penelope, it seems like a change management strategy would be better than just comms. I think that's what they mean by communication strategy. I would agree. Change management, Power BI, implementing Power BI is all about change management. It's very little of it. Like, the technology is really good. It works really well, and the learning of it's pretty easy. There's a lot of content out there. The change management piece is the challenge in large organizations. And that's kind of what this whole series of stuff is about. And that's why I wanted to read it with some people as well, because I see that as the big challenge. So, yeah, I totally agree with that, Penelope. Well, that's it for another Wednesday Lunch and Learn session. I'm sweating up a storm here. It's really hot, and I'm wearing my jacket, and I can't take it off because I'm on video. But I appreciate everybody for coming. I hope you all stay safe. If you're in Queensland, then definitely, or New South Wales as well, stay safe. Hope you're not too flooded out. It looks horrible up there. So feel free to hang around for a chat. I'll be hanging around for a little while. But I'm going to stop the recording now. So thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Same time, same link. So, yep, we'll see you then.